And that's what climate change is about. It is literally, not figuratively, a clear and present danger.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
The ability of CO2 to do the heavy work of creating a climate catastrophe is almost nil at this point.
The price of oil has been artificially elevated to the point of insanity.
That's not how you power a modern industrial system.
The ultimate goal of this renewable energy, plan is to reach the exact same point that we're at now.
You know who's tried that? Germany. 7 straight days of no wind for Germany. Their factories are shutting down.
They really do act like weather didn't happen prior to 1910.
Today is Friday.
That's right, Greta. It is Friday. This is our favorite day of the week because it is the day that the Heartland Institute broadcasts the Climate Realism Show. Hello, everyone. My name is Jim Lakely. I am the Vice President of the Heartland Institute. There is nothing else anywhere streaming that is quite like the Climate Realism Show. So I hope you will like, share, and subscribe and leave your comments underneath this video. All of these actions convince YouTube's algorithm to smile upon this program and to get the show in front of more people. And a reminder, because big tech and the legacy media do not approve of the way that we cover climate and energy policy on this program, Heartland's YouTube channel has been demonetized. So if you want to support this program, and I surely hope you do, please visit heartland.org/TCRS. That's heartland.org/TCRS. That stands for The Climate Realism Show. And you can help us make sure that this program is coming out there every Friday for the rest of time. Any support you can give us is warmly welcome and greatly appreciated. And we also want to thank today our streaming partners, junkscience.com, CFACT, Climate Depot, and What's Up With That. We have a fantastic show for you today. I cannot wait to get started, so let's do that. We have with us today, as usual, H. Sterling Burnett. He is the director of the Arthur B. Robinson Center on Climate and Environmental Policy at the Heartland Institute. We also have Linnea Lueken, research fellow for energy and environment policy at Heartland, and 2 very, very special guests and good friends, Craig Rucker and Marc Morano. They're also our streaming partners over there at CFACT. Like they've done for decades now, they were at the UN Climate Conference, COP29, in Baku, Azerbaijan, which is wrapping up here pretty soon and has been a total disaster once again. And it was about, as was said, just about every week during Donald Trump's first term, the walls are closing in. Perhaps they actually are closing in on the climate scam. We will see. Welcome everyone to the show. Should be a lot of fun.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Looking forward to it. Thanks a lot.
Me too. So, nice pipe you got there.
It's got to keep me warm. This is freezing here. Snow showers. I'm here in the Virginia suburbs of DC today.
Yes. Well, we had snow in the window behind me. That was full of snow yesterday. It's all melted already. So global cooling is upon us, at least early on in November here, even for Northern Illinois. Craig, when did you guys get back from Baku, which sounds so exotic?
Exotic is a former Soviet republic going in November on the Caspian Sea. No, not exotic, but it was a experience. We jetted in there when it first started, which was about 2 weeks ago. Last weekend, we came back after the first week. And, it was, we've been to a lot of these. I've been to 26 of the 29 Conference of the Parties. They date back to the 1990s. Generally, there's about 50,000 people that come in here to these conferences. They did it again this year. About 190 nations represented, but very few world leaders. What was really remarkable about this one is generally speaking, you have more first world nations show up to these things. In this particular case, there was really only Britain, maybe Finland and Belgium. The overwhelming number of world leaders that came to this were from African nations, Latin American nations, poor nations, and there's a reason for that. This was a finance conference. So the nations on the receiving end, the recipient who would get the money from these green climate funds and the loss and damage fund were there to try to get money. But those who were paying the bill pretty much skipped town, except for, of course, Starmer from Britain.
Yeah. Well, we'll get into. Go ahead, Marc.
Well, I was going to add, even Al Gore, I don't think he was scheduled. No one I talked to, no schedule included Al Gore. And then all of a sudden he showed up that weekend. It was only after multiple mainstream media stories about how all the world leaders were ignoring the conference. I think Al Gore was called in at the last minute. And of course, he gave like an hour speech, with the big news being that Big Al is still watching you. He merged with Google. He's had a partnership with Google to set up these trace satellites all over the globe to monitor farms, factories, emissions, so that they can later enforce these CO2 penalties on companies not compliant. But he showed up. But one thing I wanted to mention is it's been almost a week since we've been home, not quite a week, still recovering. I mean, it was 23 hours of taxis, airports, and flying straight from Baku, Azerbaijan, all the way back to Washington, D.C. And just so your listeners, watchers, viewers know, but Azerbaijan is sandwiched between Russia and Iran. And, there's a couple of times Craig and I, after some of the local liquor there, we're talking about crossing over to the border in Iran and check how far they are in those nuclear programs. That's a joke, but we didn't actually talk about that. But anyway.
All right. Well, hey, it's Al Gore's party and he'll crash it if he wants to. And that's
right.
Just the way that goes. All right. Well, before we get, there's a lot that we're going to get into about COP29 in Baku. But first, we're going to do our favorite segment here on the Climate Realism Show, and that is the crazy climate news of the week. Hit it, Andy.
Yes. Anthony isn't here to appreciate that, so I'll do it for him. God,
yeah, Anthony's not here. That's his favorite drop. And I mean, this is why you got to watch the Climate Realism Show, because there is a ton of crazy climate news every single week, and we pick out what we think are maybe the top 3 of the week. So let's get going. So here, the first item that we found this week was from, it's called, I titled it Climate, Poop, and You. This is an item from The Conversation, with the headline, Climate Change is Encouraging Unsanitary Toilet Practices Among Vulnerable Communities. Let me read a little bit from it. Climate change makes toilets more likely to break. Wow. Which leaves people more likely to go outside. That's what colleagues and I found when we studied households across 6 rural Cambodian provinces, focusing on their access to proper toilets, and when people decide to abandon sanitary systems in favor of open defecation or going outside. Our goal was to establish how living in regions vulnerable to the effects of climate change affects how well sanitary toilets function and the impact that has on household sanitation practices and perceptions. The key result of our study, which was published in the peer-reviewed journal Environment, Development, and Sustainability and Poop. No, I made up that last part. That was clear. In regions where climate change makes heavy storms and floods more common, households more frequently stop using and maintaining their toilets. Now, Sterling Burnett, if a green latrine flushes in Cambodia, but no climate alarmists are around to hear it, does it make a sound?
Well, what's coming out of the green latrine user might be making a sound. I can't speak to that. This story is as idiotic as I can imagine. First off, they went to one country. They talk about modern toilets. My suspicion is most of the place. The picture was not a modern toilet. I'm sorry, an outhouse is not a modern toilet. So my suspicion is they weren't using modern toilets. They were just using covered holes before. And as far as I can tell, there's no evidence whatsoever that climate change is causing toilets to break. Because there's no evidence whatsoever it's changing the weather patterns in Cambodia. Floods aren't becoming more severe or more frequent, nor are droughts becoming more severe or more frequent. Typhoons aren't more common. So what is the climate impact? Where's the long-term trend? And if that's not trending, then honestly, I'm wondering how you break an outhouse. I guess maybe the board you're sitting across can crack. But if it's modern toilets, what is climate change supposedly doing? Rusting the metal. It's just a stupid story. It's just one more in a long line of stories. Or whatever's going bad, whatever's happening, if it's bad, or if it can be perceived by some researcher as bad, then it's climate change.
Yeah, well, that's how you get your funding, and then you can study virtually anything, and as long as you say that we're going to study the effects of X on climate change or climate change's effects on Y, some government bureaucrat will write you a check.
So it's taxpayer money that's going down the toilet in this particular.
No,
Literally.
presumably not, Craig. It's not going down the toilet anymore, and it's just being scattered in the outdoors along with the dung that. Maybe it's more dangerous because now monkeys find the dung and sling it at you. I don't know.
Well,
Yeah.
At the Rio, it was South African Earth Summit in Johannesburg, 2002. One of the speakers lamented the introduction of the flush toilet. And I remember at the time I interviewed Bjorn Lomborg, who was talking, he made a lot of fun of it. But this has been an old movement. There's been articles in Grist magazine about people getting rid of their flush toilet and putting in sustainable toilets, which are these little, self-contained units. And one of the writers actually did it, and they said there are all kinds of little flies and bugs flying out. And the experiment did not go well. I won't get any more graphic than that. But there's been that. So it's interesting that they're now something that they once fought against, the flush toilet and modern toilets. They're now saying climate change is going to ruin. Therefore, we need to go Green New Deal. We need to go full Marxist to protect the toilets. They've sort of flipped in the last 20 years.
Well, I mean, Sheryl Crow that actually wanted to use only 1 or 2 strands of toilet paper in these toilets.
Yeah, she said one.
Yeah, 1. That's it. So if we use just 1, does that lessen the stress on how much you have to? You clog a toilet with too much toilet paper, it causes stress. So if we take the whole program here and do the Sheryl Crow thing along with taking it easy, I would think that would help the toilets last longer.
You end up using more water to clean your hands, however, so you wear that equipment down. And by the way, to be fair, I don't often agree with Rosie O'Donnell, but she was pretty clear with old Cheryl when she proposed that. She said, my fat blank needs more than 1 pad of toilet paper.
Yeah. Well, this is all the proof you need in case you need it anymore that the global climate agenda will make your life shittier.
Come on, man.
One last point. I interviewed Fran Drescher.
You got away with that. I could have said it. Damn.
We're demonetized, Sterling. It's okay.
Okay.
I interviewed Fran Drescher like 2003 or 4 at one of these DC events, and she had a war on toilet paper because it was coming from old growth forest. So there's a whole movement to push this sustainable toilet paper. And I remember Larry David in his foreword, I think I can't remember, some book. I think it may have been his ex-wife's, Lori David. He just said after they got divorced, one of the greatest things, he went out and bought traditional toilet paper and got rid of all the sandpaper crap. So even Hollywood liberals aren't in on this anti-toilet and toilet paper agenda.
It's just going to be like Demolition Man. We're going to get 3 seashells and no one's going to explain how that's supposed to work.
That's great. What a reference. All right, let's move on to our second item here. Yet another on a long list of things that climate change makes worse, and that is AIDS, apparently. This is from theamericanprogress.org. The headline is Climate Change Jeopardizes HIV Care in the United States. Policymakers and public health officials need to take steps to integrate climate resilience in HIV/AIDS healthcare programs to mitigate the disproportionate impact that extreme weather events have on people living with HIV. This is just a guess. I don't think this is going to be the focus of the public health officials under a Trump administration, but we'll see, I suppose. But this story, though, highlights, of course, Hurricanes Helene and Milton. Continues here. While extreme weather events have broad negative health impacts, those with chronic health conditions such as HIV are particularly vulnerable during and following these disasters. In 2022, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention estimated that 1.2 million people over the age of 13 in the United States are living with HIV. These individuals are extremely vulnerable to climate change because they depend on consistent access to providers, medications, and other support services to stay alive. And, of course, climate crises often disrupt access to these resources. So I'm just going to stop there. But, Linnea, I'm going to start with you here. I mean, once again, there seems to be literally nothing that climate change, again, that we're supposedly chiefly responsible for, doesn't make worse. And that includes not being able to get medication if you're HIV positive.
Yeah, this is really a weird framing. I guess it's just they have to write a certain number of climate related stories a month or whatever. So they're trying to hit their quota. So they're reaching. It's kind of like breaking news. When an extreme weather event happens, it's hard to get medical care. Like, period. You don't have to. HIV isn't special in this case. There's people who need drugs for, diabetes or for cancer treatments and stuff, and they're all having a hard time accessing that stuff too. Like, why the HIV focus? I have no idea. This is,
Well, it's
not
a follow-up. It's a follow-up. Just a couple of years ago, if you go to Climate Realism, you'll find stories. Just a couple of years ago, when the wildfires in the West were pretty bad, they ran the same story. Climate change, but it was cancer patients who were affected by climate change because they were unable to get to their doctors because they were fleeing wildfires, because roads had been closed. And it's the same problem. There's no evidence that climate change is causing an increase in wildfires. And there's no evidence that climate change is causing an increase in hurricanes. It's not just HIV patients, as Linnea pointed out. It's anyone who needs medical care. And they needed medical care and they needed help before there was climate change and there were storms and they couldn't get to the doctor. Look, like I said, the headline is almost interchangeable. You can go back and find climate change makes cancer patients worse because of wildfire. It's like, gosh, just plug in any disease, plug in any subgroup you want to alarm, and you've got your story. It writes itself. All you got to do is just skip anything having to do with facts.
This is the type of thing you saw at COP29. There's always a scientific component, but then you always have these little side events that take place. And a lot of them deal with racism, sexism, gay rights and everything else, as though that they're impacted more by climate change. They always make this case. I often had occasion actually to ask him one time, so let's suppose a tsunami comes in like it did in Thailand a number of years ago and just kills lots of people, or it comes in and wipes out a whole village. So basically the whole village dies, but women and children are impacted the most. So it's an effort to try to bring in the rest of the left's political issue. Let's face it, climate change is an issue that's near and dear to the left. It's not taken as seriously by those on the right, but this is part of their constituency. And it's a way that they engage them by letting them, buy into what's really prominent in the whole leftist cause, which is, racial diversity and, the whole thing with the gay and radical agenda on gay rights and things of that sort. So, I think that's why they're doing this sort of thing.
I just add it's rolling climate change concerns into a public health threat. Right before this summit started, COP29, the president of the UN Climate Summit said, "At COP29, we must treat the climate crisis with the same urgency as COVID. History shows it can be done." Oh. So anything they can do to make this a medical issue, they think, bing, ding, 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 we're going to get people concerned and scared, and they'll be more likely to support the climate agenda.
They think comparing this to COVID is a good thing. Are you serious? And that's how you're going to get public support?
Yes. Yeah. This is published in the UK Guardian. Guarantee you that 95% of all UK Guardian readers think it's a great idea.
Look, if I can get a vaccine to never hear a climate alarmist speak or publish again, I'll take that vaccine regardless of what RFK might say.
Yeah, right after the anti-flatulence vaccine they're going to give to cows, and then they make it good for humans. Yeah, we covered that on last week's show, and I think it's actually going to be coming up again soon. So we're going to be hitting that topic again. But let's move on to our third big crazy climate news topic this week, and that is there's this new app out there, well, new to me at least, called Blue Sky. It's now, since Elon Musk took over Twitter, and since allowing people that are not on the left to speak their minds drives leftists crazy. They're all now escaping. It used to be Mastodon, then they were going to Threads, and now the latest trend is going off to something called Blue Sky. Twitter has, I think I looked this up yesterday, 330 million, or maybe 600 million global users. Blue Sky has 12 million, which is an impressive number, but not in comparison to Twitter. So all those people fleeing to Blue Sky, as we mentioned actually on last week's show, they'll be back. They'll be back. But one person who is on Twitter and is a climate realist, maybe we can have him on the show sometime, is Roger Pelkey Jr. And he has a Substack, as everybody seems to now, called the Honest Broker. And he had a post this week. He was invited actually over to Blue Sky, and he shared a little bit of his experience here. So he writes, "This week I was invited by a colleague to try out the Blue Sky app as an alternative to X Twitter. They told me that it was far more welcoming for discussion about energy and climate. Sure, I thought, I'll give it a try. I actively posted there for a bit and learned that climate activists have created a Blue Sky climate block list that focuses on me and anyone who even mentions me. The block list prevents those on it from seeing the posts of those who join and creates a disincentive for anyone to mention those on the list lest they get added to it. This is not a new strategy for some climate scientists and journalists. People are free to create their social media echo chambers however they like, of course, but one detail is worth mentioning. One person promoting the block list is one of the lead scientists of the U.S. National Climate Assessment. That degree of intolerance among those selected to represent the climate science community is a problem for climate science and politics." Now, Marc Morano, I'm going to go to you in a minute, so get ready. This last little bit, Roger writes, quote, "The efforts by some climate scientists and climate journalists to create a firewall between those few with acceptable pure views and everyone else might just help break the fever of climate reductionism found in leading media, science, and policy institutions, and thus help policy debates move on to energy realism and climate pragmatism. One can hope." Now, Marc, you are quite active on Twitter and on social media in general. Do you think Roger has a false hope here? Do you think we might be reaching the end of the most radical climate alarmists being able to control all media coverage and what's acceptable to say about climate and energy?
I'm actually, surprisingly, I'm actually optimistic that he's correct. And I'll tell you why. Everyone from Bill Maher to Joe Scarborough, and even some people on The View are realizing that we can't control these little echo chambers. They didn't see Trump's second victory coming, even though he may have won more than twice. And they didn't see this and so they're reevaluating this whole idea of controlling the narrative. Bill Maher gave an incredible 10-minute, actually bashed, I think it was a mainstream media reporter, really went after him on this exact point. You can't live in the little bubble. I actually think this is going to have a big impact. I think CNN, they already have a really effective conservative voice on there now. And it was hilarious because they were talking about transgender issues and he misgendered someone, and the other CNN person went bonkers on it.
Yeah.
Really got almost left on live TV, was so offended. But that was used by many other liberals to say this is out of control. I think they've gone so far that we could at least roll back to an era, let's call it 2010, when you could actually have Will Happer on CNN or MSNBC, and these networks actually allowed debate, ABC News. Don't get too optimistic, but I think it's going to be part of a whole scale approach. And don't be surprised if CNN brings in more conservatives as well, and even MSNBC, because whatever they've been doing ain't working, and they know that. So they're doing some serious soul searching.
Well, further evidence of that comes from what happened at the LA Times and the Washington Post and CNN, where CNN has actually said we need to get more conservatives on here. We need wider variety of voices. MSNBC may be shut down soon. They're being spun off into nothing, right? The LA Times, Jeff Bezos and at the Post and the LA Times both refused to endorse any candidates this time. Scientific American, their editor had to resign after backing Kamala and then making some vicious comments on Twitter that came to light. And the LA Times said they were the first, and it may have been 2010 when they did it, but they were the first major news outlet to announce publicly they would no longer allow climate dissent on their pages. If you were a realist, you could not get published there, not even a letter to the editor. They would not allow debate. Their owner has said, we've got to have more voices. We can't be squashing debate. Now, he didn't mention climate change specifically, but it's my hope that if we start submitting there again, maybe we at least get interviewed and we get some letters in there. It's their wall around legitimate speech. It looks to me like it's crumbling.
Well, I do know that UNESCO, right, of course, just announced a couple days ago they're going to be going after and they're seeking funding from major governments to put in a fund to go after climate denial globally. What that entails entirely, I know France has signed on, Great Britain signed on, Brazil is leading the charge on this as well. Will this, in fact, actually, and they want governments to commit to this? What does that actually, how does that actually play out? I don't know. But I am a little bit more skeptical as to whether or not we will see it globally. Because you go over to Europe or other places around the world, they got pretty tight clamps down. I still think that's the end game. We've escaped that a little bit in America, but we've got a ways to go. So I think it was helpful having, obviously, Elon buy out X, or Twitter at the time, now X. But I don't know. Let's hope that it is the start of good things, but I remain a little bit more skeptical than you, Sterling, or Mark.
Well, another thing that gives me hope is you're right. The Europeans had these clampdowns, right? But many of the governments that did the clamping down are no longer in power. And they're being replaced quite regularly over there in Europe. I'm not sure how long Lula will be president in Brazil. We have the example of Argentina and Milei. I hope I didn't mispronounce the man's name. But the point is, governments change and policies sometimes change along with them. And dissent is rising even in Europe. And I think pretty soon it will be okay publicly in many of those places. Maybe not in England, because England took a step backwards and they are among the fiercest censorious governments in the world. I think England almost matches China for censorship of dissent. So maybe not in England, but in other parts of Europe, I think the threat may come from other governments saying, we're going to follow England's exit if you don't change the way the EU operates and allow more dissent and less top-down mandates.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're gonna move on here, Marc, Morano. Before we move on to our main topic here, and we have a couple memes to share as well. We have a viewer, Jerry Palmer, who's hoping that is low carbon tobacco in your pipe, and I would hope if it's not low carbon tobacco, it is at least organic and sustainable tobacco. So
actually, it's tobacco from Mississippi, a place called the Country Squire. It's called Hunting Creek, and I believe it's high carbon. I don't know that you can make a low carbon tobacco. That's a fascinating concept, especially when it's combusted. Now, maybe when they make it, maybe it's a sustainable farm that it's grown on, but I'm not aware of that, and I doubt it coming from Mississippi.
All right. Well, we got a couple of memes here to share in our before we get on to our main topic. And this first one, speaking of blue sky. This is Steve Malloy, who is the head of junkscience.com. He's a good friend of all of ours, and probably the most indefatigable climate realist on X. He tried to join Blue Sky, and as you might expect, he was attacked like white blood cells attack an infection. And here's one. Peter Glick, that scumbag Peter Glick, who committed a crime against the Heartland Institute and tried to get us shut down and ruined, and he failed because he's a loser. And he also left X, and he says about Steve Malloy, he's one of the worst, blatant, dangerous climate deniers in the U.S., now on Blue Sky. Please welcome him with a block. Which
makes me want to join. I want to join Blue Sky. I wasn't even thinking about it before, but now I'm interested.
I know now I'm getting talked into it. So if I'm not attacked like like an infection by white blood cells, you're not doing it right. So perhaps we should all go over to Blue Sky and drive them freaking nuts. Second meme we found here this week. It's a scene from that great based movie, as they say these days, Falling Down, when they give you a paper straw wrapped in plastic. Kind of drives you crazy. So that's pretty funny. All right. We can get on to our main topic today, and that is COP29, how Baku was bonkers. Now, before we get into the skinny from the ground by Craig and Marc from CFACT, I wanted you guys and the audience to hear directly from an alarmist who is extremely disappointed with this UN climate conference, guys. His name is Douglas McIntyre. He's the editor-in-chief of a publication called Climate Crisis 24/7. Yes, that's the name of his publication. So you have there's no confusion about where he's coming from. And I'm sure you'll be sad to see, guys, that he's taking it quite hard. And it also looks like he took something quite hard to the top of his noggin, poor guy. So, Andy, why don't we go ahead and play that video for everybody?
Big Oil is the winner of this year's International Climate Talks. This is Douglas McIntyre, editor-in-chief at Climate Crisis 247, coming to you from New York City. This year's Global Climate Talks, COP29, have ended in a failure. There wasn't an agreement on what the rich countries would pay to offset their own global warming, and there wasn't an agreement on how much they would give to poorer countries to do the same. The estimate now is that the total ticket every year is $1 trillion to keep global warming from rising. Who wins here? Well, notably, a lot of the large oil companies attended this meeting, and so did a lot of the large oil-producing nations. They walked away with what they wanted, and that is that the world continues to depend on oil. Crude oil is now pumping at the rate that's never happened in history, and the United States has become the world's largest oil provider by far. It appears that OPEC Plus will also increase its oil production within the next year. So as we walk away from COP29, the one thing is certain is that the chances that the global climate crisis are going to be improved at any point in the next 5 to 10 years is close to zero. The chance that the oil companies would prosper is close to 100%.
Yep. And some of you viewers and listeners old enough to remember, put that back up on there, Andy. This is who I had to, this reminded me of this guy. Yes. The poor guy with the bandage on his thing. Good old Les Nessman reporting live from COP29. I knew Andy wouldn't get it. Linnea doesn't get it, but I know Sterling, Craig, and Marc do, and most of our viewers. So
appropriate around Thanksgiving with the
it is. Yes.
Yeah.
God is our witness. No.
Yes, hitting the grounds like wet bags of cement, those poor turkeys. So I'm going to throw it to you guys here in a second, because what you guys need to know about CFACT is that I believe their official motto is that the best things in life are crushing your enemies, seeing them driven before you, and hearing the lamentations of the alarmists. I believe that is on your website, or maybe it's only on Climate Depot. But to me, I just happened to come across that this week, and I thought it was a good way to introduce the topic, because we have our own viewpoints on it. But when you look at the people that have invested so much of their time and energy, and frankly, the very nature of their souls into having a successful COP, this is now 2 in a row that was held in a petro state. The last one was in the United Arab Emirates. This is in Azerbaijan. I believe, Craig, you had shared with us that the president, the head of this COP, the guy in charge of it, gave a speech where he said oil is a gift from God. So yes,
Linnea Lueken, he's the president actually of. He gave had a day where they brought in all these world leaders. As I mentioned, most of them were from the developing country, but the one that was invited to open it up was Azerbaijan, because they were the host country, and he was the one who said that. He really took him to task. It's actually worth Googling, looking at his speech online, because he basically was unapologetic. I mean, their country gets, I think, 60% of its national economy or revenues come from oil production. Ilham Aliyev called fossil fuels a gift of God. It's extremely important. Very interesting when you go to this conference. Our hotel was probably like a half hour or so outside of the town, and we'd take our taxi in each day, and you'd see fields, just nonstop oil rigs pretty much all the way there. And shamelessly, or proudly, I guess, the government of Azerbaijan had these welcome to COP29 signs right in the midst of a bunch of oil rigs. We took pictures of them because it just caught our attention. They, just like Al Jaber last year in Dubai, who also defended the oil industry that country has. These were 2 oil execs that were chairs of both last year and this year. And really, it's kind of 3 years, because Egypt gets a lot of its energy, too, from fossil fuel use. So it's actually 3 years going that this is the case. Why this is occurring? good question. I think it all stems from money. These are countries willing to, put up the bucks for this sort of conference, because certainly I can see why some of the Greens like Al and people like Al Gore are really upset about this. I mean, it's, it's kind of like having something to stop smoking held by Philip Morris or something. It's complete hypocrisy, but it's something they continue to do.
Yep. Marc Morano, you were, you CFACT in general, really, I mean, like Craig said, you've been to how many of these, 26 out of the 29 or something like that?
I've been to 21 out of 23, if you count the UN Earth Summit, which was 2002, is when I started going to these summits.
Right. And so actually you sent me a picture of some of the people that you had met. I mean, one of the specialties of CFACT, for one, they are completely fearless. They are actually fun and funny. And so they embrace the idea of being the contrarians walking around, the heretics that are in the church, right? So that's kind of their deal. So tell us a little bit about how that was. I mean, you guys just have a blast talking sense to people who believe nonsense.
Well, this is important. We went through Istanbul, spent a day or two there on the way to Baku, Azerbaijan. And I can say, and I think Craig will back me up, and we also went with Peter Murphy, there was not a single cab driver, hotel worker, restaurant worker, anyone we met in museums who, when you mentioned Donald Trump or showed a MAGA hat, just didn't light up and basically say, Donald Trump, give thumbs up. They loved him. I'm out all over the place. And it got to the point, and I think this is the picture you're referring to, the UN staff of local Azerbaijan residents lit up with, and there's the picture. We had MAGA hats, which we handed out, and they went nuts. These are the young staff right outside the green zone and at the COP29. And they were so excited, they started taking photos. And Peter Murphy, who was with us, they gave him his own office in the back, even though he wasn't supposed to be there, because they were just so grateful to even put the hats on for a brief moment. Donald Trump is seen as like a global, I think to everyone everywhere, Donald Trump is just seen as the anti-establishment against this whole globalist thing. And I think, especially in Turkey, which is a nationalist country, especially in Azerbaijan, which is a nationalist country, I think they just eat up the message and the image of Donald Trump.
So, yeah, I mean, I find it amazing that you ran into all, Donald Trump fans, but you guys were among the few, quote unquote, climate realists there. Although, maybe there's signs that, we read that Substack piece about Roger Pelkey trying to go to Blue Sky and at least have a rational conversation about climate. And they immediately, like I said, attack him like white blood cells attack a wound. But the idea that there's going to be, well, I should just say, it seems very encouraging that the last two COPs especially have been very discouraging. And the fact that this COP happened immediately after a revolutionary election in the United States, which was the worst possible news, it couldn't be worse than going into this COP. Plus, it's in a petro state. What are we still going to have COPs 5 years from now? Is this even going to still be a thing?
Well, real quick, and to answer that directly, because of Donald Trump's election, because no world leaders came, and because this was in a petro state, Al Gore and a whole bunch of Al Gore separately, then a whole bunch of including the former UN Secretary General and others, signed a letter basically saying we need to ban anyone, because they were upset about the oil's a gift from God from the Azerbaijan head, that they want to ban them from future conferences. They're treating it just like Blue Sky, social media, and everything else. They want to ban any dissenting voices from government officials attending, which I think someone was saying, yeah, what a great idea, because you're going to get even less participation, less impact, less chance that these COPs would even continue. So I'm all for the censorship at the COPs. Throw out anyone who speaks even a fraction of sense, and that's the best way I can think of to derail it, because then you'll have less countries even interested in participating.
Yeah, you'll have countries start withdrawing from Paris, like we're going to do. You'll have, it's like, if you're not going to allow us to be there, if you're not going to allow us to be part of the rotation for conferences, then why are we participating? Get out of the UNFCCC. It's not just that one faction is calling for bans of these countries, which will make it more insular, more, like you say, a blue sky, an echo chamber. But others are also now saying these conferences have run their course. They no longer make sense. Even some of the developing countries said, why are we here? What is it? Was it Togo or no? It's Papua New Guinea that said we're not going because it makes
They're
no
a
sense.
complete waste of time.
Yeah, a waste of time. Other countries have said the same thing. Former UN IPCC officials have said these no longer make sense. I think I saw one person say it's not fit for purpose. Yes. Now, my suspicion is that there's a lot of bureaucrats that enjoy these conferences. It's a big junket. They get to see new places. They don't spend all their time in meetings. They go to cultural things. They eat nice meals. None of them are eating bugs. So they're still going to lobby to have these conferences. They're going to say it's an important thing. Oh, it's an important thing. We've got to keep this going. We got to save the planet. But it will really all be about, I need my yearly vacation. They don't pay me enough from the small government to go on real vacations, but this one is a free junket the government sends me on.
And what you're saying, Sterling, can be borne out because I would honestly say most of the delegates I met do go there to enjoy it. And the UN's a little sensitive of this because a few years ago in Spain, when they had a COP there, we filmed them all eating Burger King. And we thought it was the Impossible Burger, that they must be having, food that was just, somehow earth friendly or meatless or something, because that's what the UN touts. It wasn't. We talked to the actual managers, and we then had somebody dress up as a cow walking through there talking to the delegates, just as a little stunt, because we exposed that and they only allow certain vendors in the blue zone, which is where all the main delegates are. And they allowed Burger King to serve real meat. It looked and then there's side events saying ban meat. At this particular conference, they did have menus within the conference part thing this time that they said all the foods were looked at. We actually were emailed menus that actually the carbon footprint of all the foods being served was being looked at. And I think that was to deflect from the criticism that they've got of this. But it is becoming like a complete vacation. You can actually go to the green zone now. They have a gift shop. Now that's crazy.
They have merch.
You can get a gift shop to get your
merch.
Yeah, you can get your gifts now for attending the conference and mementos so that you can remember to go there. That never was the case 10 years ago or anything.
Wow.
Of that.
I want to know how you look at a tasteless, smellless, and invisible gas.
Yeah, and
I'm looking. We're looking at it. We're eyeing it. We're looking at molecules under the microscope. No, it's.
Well, first of all, Craig, cow lives matter. I don't know why you're so mean. And second, we actually have, thanks to Marc Morano, we have video evidence of what you were talking about at the food court at COP29. So, Andy, can you play meat on menu video, please?
Another report here from COP29 in Azerbaijan, the United Nations Climate Summit. Speakers yesterday, very prominent and high-profile speakers, talked about meat rationing and a meat tax and how the danger that agriculture and farmers were doing to the climate summit. We've even had UN reports saying that cow emissions are more damaging to the planet than the entire transportation sector, planes, trains, automobiles combined. Well, guess what? At this UN climate summit, you can see right there, they're serving beef hot dogs. They're serving burgers. I have the menus here. Meat is here, and I have not noticed any kind of meat tax additional on the food.
Marc, I love the way I really admire the way you played that straight, like you're Dan Rather or something. I don't know how you did it, but well done.
Yeah, I mean, and it goes deeper. I checked out all the menus. They had sit-down restaurants. They had food court. And one of my videos actually showed the line for the buffet with the beef bourguignon and all the chicken. And it was overflow. And then I panned over. You could see the vegan-only food court. And there were like 2, 3, 4 people in line and the entire thing. There was no interest. And as Craig mentioned, they even sent out an email like reminding people, hey, we have vegan offers. This was after, they got a lot of negative publicity when there was opening day, when they called for the global meat tax and to come after farmers. And, it's a very serious issue because remember, again, our election in the U.S. gives us a reprieve. But John Kerry had said last year, American farmers are next in the net zero restrictions. They're coming after two things with agriculture. They're coming after the nitrogen-based fertilizer, which affects the high-yield agriculture. And that's what the Netherlands farmers fought against. They're also coming after methane. And this is why you have cows, you have Bill Gates changing their diet, trying to capture their emissions from their butt and their burps. And both of these things are to create meat rationing globally. We know this because Christina Figueres, the former climate chief, who said we should treat meat eaters like they did smokers in the restaurant, put them in their own section in the back corner and try to stigmatize them. They want to come after meat. And I just think the irony, and Craig mentioned in Spain, they had the same thing, Burger King, long lines. They're not willing to walk that walk. And that's an important thing to show people. And it's so absurd because I don't think the rank and file delegates even pay attention to what the UN actually wants. They're just there, as Craig said, to enjoy themselves.
Yeah.
I long for the day. I long for the day when restaurants set up a meatless section of the restaurant, because it's going to be the smallest section of that restaurant, unless it's a completely vegan restaurant, is the meatless section. No one's going to go to a Golden Corral or your favorite steak place. We're going to stigmatize all these meat eaters at some pick your favorite steak place, McCormick and Smick or something, and we're going to stigmatize them. We're going to set aside a section just for them. Yeah, the section is going to be like 90% of the restaurant.
Yeah. Well, if you're super hungry at the COP, you should definitely get into the vegan line because it'll be short and you can eat in 2 minutes. Before we go on to there's two other aspects of this I want to get to before we go to Q&A. We got some questions from our wonderful audience. Craig Rucker, you wrote a piece for Newsmax this week. The headline of it is "Time to Net Zero USA Out of UN Climate Meetings." You can find that at newsmax.com. Everyone should go over there definitely and check that out. Why don't you explain that piece and why you think that's time for the United States to net zero out of this?
I think that for a long time we've been coming here, and I think it's a lot of the delegates that are coming back, even that are against what we're doing with CFACT, which is try to bring climate realism into these conferences, are saying they're a waste of time. They're all about money. They're not really getting anything done. If you were worried about climate change and you really thought the world was going to burn up from it, these conferences aren't going to help you. They're not spending enough. They're claiming they need $1 trillion. They have already in place since 2009 a green climate fund that's supposed to be $100 billion. So what have they raised? They've raised $13.5 billion toward their climate cause. So it's wholly inadequate. Countries are not going to continue to give more. So if you're on that side, the actions that are being taken are not going to get you where you want. Now, for those of us who are climate realists, which I think that the trend is going to go more that way with Donald Trump being president. These things are just infringements on our liberty, as Marc mentioned, taking away our meat. They're brainwashing young people about fears about the future, and they're just a waste of money. So you're right. They're giving bureaucrats a vacation, but they're not tangibly accomplishing anything other than just alarming the public, alarming the grassroots that are climate activists in the various nations. It's just a negative. So let's just pack up our bags, go home, call it a day. It was a good experiment. The Paris Accords a failure, and nations aren't going to reach it.
Yep. And I would just add the narrative is critically important there. Trump 1.0 2017. Well, we'll renegotiate the UN Paris Agreement. We got a good deal. And you had Rick Perry, the energy secretary, urging him to stay in. You had Rex Tillerson urging him to stay in. The only one who in his administration I'm aware of was Scott Pruitt, who was vocally saying we should pull out. Trump 2.0 is like, we're out. This is a scam. It's a hoax. And let's hope he submits this, the UN Paris Pact to the Senate for ratification, which would then, when they reject it, nullify the whole, if I'm understanding this legally correct, nullify the whole UN climate process, which began under George H.W. Bush, Republican president, back in 1992. And that was ratified, by the way, by the Senate on a voice vote. So we don't even know who to point our fingers at our fingers at as who ratified that Senate. We don't have I don't think we have a roll call.
Well, it was non-binding in 1992. It wasn't even binding. They didn't make it binding until several years later. So they just thought they were signing a nothing burger, had no idea it would grow into the Kyoto Protocol and then the Paris Climate Accord. So I don't know as though these things are going to go anywhere. I mean, nation states, part of the COP process is they're supposed to up their ante every few years. They call them NDC, nationally determined contributions. That's part of the Paris Accord. Most of the nations have submitted them already for 2030, saying they're going to get rid of a certain amount of climate emissions by that time. They're supposed to up the ante. I think the only ones that I was aware of that did while we were there were Brazil and the United Kingdom. They're going to become 70 or 81% carbon neutral, are going to reduce their greenhouse gases by 81% by the year 2035. Nobody believes this. And if they do, it's going to be accounting tricks. And, so we'll see what winds up happening, but they're just throwing numbers in the air. Nobody believes them. And as far as the developing countries, the reason they're going to pull out is they're not going to get the money that they need. They've established now what they call a loss and damage fund. This is for adaptation. These are for countries that are experiencing typhoons, wildfires, whatever. They're supposed to be able to dip into this fund to pay for things that have been happening since time began, but now they call it climate. They want $20 billion. This is in addition to the Green Climate Fund. They've raised thus far less than one. And I don't see that they're even going to get anywhere near this. So the developing countries are going to get tired of this and go home. In my opinion, the whole thing's been a failure.
Wow.
It's not just $20 billion. It's $20 billion annually.
Right.
Right. I mean, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, that as part of the Paris Climate Agreement and the year after's follow-up, countries had agreed to the Green Climate Fund. It was $100 billion a year beginning when? 2020, 5 years after the Paris Climate Agreement. They've never even approached or come close to hitting that target. And the funds that they do accumulate every year, there's been repeated reports showing they can't even account for 40% of the spending. There's no tracking. There's no modern accounting. And some of the things they have found they're being spent on, it's hardly to say, oh, these are climate mitigation. When you're spending Italian money on gelato shops in developing countries or love stories filmed in Colombia, that doesn't sound very climate mitigation to me. So not only is the money not there, they missed the target for more than 5 years now by a tremendous margin. And there's no reason for thinking their new targets will be any more likely to be hit.
Yeah,
but they might have good toilet seats.
Yeah, that's true. Let me get to one last one. This this last story I have in our notes applies to this. This is from the Daily Caller. They're basically just they're reporting on something that was in the Financial Times, and it says foreign officials push for global climate taxes at UN summit ahead of Trump's second term. Foreign government officials attending the ongoing UN climate change summit are advocating for de facto global climate taxes to fund green energy development in poor countries ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House, according to the Financial Times. Officials from countries including France, Spain, and Kenya are pushing to plan so-called solidarity levies on various industries at this year's conference so that a more developed version of the scheme can be presented at next year's get-together in Brazil, Financial Times reported. The idea is to settle on a plan that would raise $100 billion or more annually to fund climate-related efforts in developing countries by imposing de facto taxes on the shipping and aviation industries and possibly other sectors as well. Some of those other sectors include levying taxes on cryptocurrency trades, fossil fuel production, plastic producers, billionaires, and financial transactions could possibly be subject as well to the solidarity levies scheme. Craig and well, everybody on the panel here, we've heard this before. This seems to me to be the 458th different funding scheme for supposedly climate mitigation, so that the developed world, the wealthy countries in the world, just start shoveling cash to developing countries that do not have any accountability and are basically klepto states. Is this going to actually happen? Is this, this apparently they want to try to get this at the end. I know you guys will be watching to see if a resolution saying this passes.
I mean, we already kind of do this, right? Like we don't it's not, a signed on like laid out agreement like that, but we already send tons and tons of money to developing nations for green related projects, like infrastructure projects. If you follow, there's an account on X called Oilfield Rando, and he has a secondary account that is, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. If I remember it, I'll post it somewhere. But his other account just like tweets out all of the spending that our government does and like what projects it's for. And it's like, solar panels on huts in African villages, that kind of stuff. So we already do that stuff.
But we don't tax. We don't. But
it's not tied to a tax.
Like that's government tax, spending. Right. So it's a tax on consumers, or more likely in the U.S. a tax on future people as yet unborn, because it's all done with deficit spending. But they're talking about a direct tax on particular industries, and there may be a few countries that have done that. I think the EU has got a the airlines tax. But does anyone think even this Congress can get that through, much less the next Congress?
No, they won't. I mean,
good luck there.
UN's been doing this for decades. Going back a ways, they called it the Tobin tax, where they wanted almost like a sales tax on things. Like any government institution, it's in the business of growing itself and finding new sources of revenue. And just depending on contributions every year is a tough way to go. But so if they can get a tax, they'll push for it. I don't think they'll be successful ultimately. I mean, the Green Climate Fund's a case in point. I think they are going to find the same with this loss and damage fund, but it doesn't keep them from trying. And who knows, I think from their perspective, maybe one day they'll hit gold and the right leaders will be in place and they'll sign off on something like this.
Yeah, they've been pushing these kind of global taxes for decades. And certainly no one's going to try that in the next 4 years under Donald Trump, because if you can't tax the U.S. And the U.S. isn't part of it, no other country is going to be part of it, which brings up that whole Trump effect, which made this into like a funeral effect of this conference. All these ambitious ideas, I think they're just going through the motions. They know it's not going to happen because of that. And I just wanted to read one leader was a UN advisor, turned on the UN and said, these COP conferences have become meaningless rituals which don't actually deliver anything. And this was the CBC Canada reporting this. This was their headline. And of course, Greta long ago renounced the UN as nothing but a scam and greenwashing. And I think we can all agree with Greta Thunberg on that. So I think this whole idea of the global taxes, again, they're just going through the motions. This is what they have to do. They're already excited, geared up for Belém, Brazil next year. They're going into the rainforest to follow Joe Biden when he disappeared into the trees. Maybe we're going to find Biden, kind of like find Waldo. Where's Waldo next year? But that's where the next one's going to be.
Do you not think that it's going to produce more carbon going to Belém, Brazil than it would take going to Sao Paulo or
Belém's much nicer. You can actually go out in the jungle. Now we'll need vaccines. We're going to need yellow fever, malaria pills, and a couple others because you're going that's deep in the jungle there.
They're going to have to build but they're going to have to build a lot of infrastructure, or they're going to have to build a lot of transport from the hotels to where the conference is held. The point is, what you don't do if you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint is hold your climate conference in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
At least if it's a climate conference and everybody's worried about global warming, it sets the scene more being in the jungles of Brazil than it does on the Caspian Sea in the former Soviet Union, which was quite cold at times. So I give them credit for that. I think the activists will have more free reign. The last couple of years being in places like Egypt and United Arab Emirates and then Azerbaijan, there wasn't a whole lot of activists outside. You got in serious trouble if you did any of that. So any protests really were confined inside of the conference for the most part, other than one dead whale.
Yes, I should say we have to mention the fake dead whale. Tell them that.
No, you go ahead.
Well, we thought it was real. What's funny was in order to make it smell like a dead whale, they put dead fish around it. And of course, I pointed this out. I just factually reported that. And everyone on Twitter is like, a whale's not a fish. A whale's not a fish, which is a good point. Why are they making a dead mammal? Why are they putting dead fish around it? But that's what they did. It looked so real. This is the Caspian Sea. To my knowledge, and I'd have to look at a map to verify, but I don't think there's any whales of that size, magnitude, or any whales at all. And this was laid out right in the town square, not far from a Rolls Royce. By the way, Azerbaijan is the ultimate of the net zero, Great Reset, World Economic Forum, UN vision. You have very wealthy oligarchy. You have city block after city block, Rolls Royce, Armani, Gucci, the nicest stores that rival anything you see on Beverly Hills or Bethesda, McLean, or Fifth Avenue in the United States. And then you leave a couple things and you get to dire poverty, crumbling infrastructure. And they even had not only stray cats and dogs to the streets, but I went running one day and ran into a stray cow. And I'm not making that up. It was a cow wandering the streets. I was telling the guy at the hotel, what's a cow doing out there? I don't know. It's running loose. So what happened was they picked the wealthiest area to put this dead fake whale in. I don't know what it was made of. It was an amazing looking whale. And in the distance, and Alex Newman was there, John Robson was there at Canada. So there's a couple other skeptics actually that made the trek. But they had a big sign in the background, like a building, and you could actually see an offshore windmill, which you'd think as Americans, we'd think, oh my gosh, this is people protesting offshore wind. No, they were saying global warming is causing dead whales, and that's why they were out there. But it was an amazing stunt, amazing, I guess you'd call it, I wouldn't say animation, but amazing just
sculpture.
God, it looked truly like a dead whale.
And he's totally right. Wealth on the inside, poverty on the outside, cats and dogs. They were eating the cats. They were eating the dogs.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Look, global warming is so bad and the sea levels have risen so much that even open ocean whales are now finding their way into the Caspian Sea, apparently. Right. So, yeah.
Well, no, miles from the Caspian Sea into the capital, right? This wasn't on the beach. This was in the middle of a city.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in a harbor. Yeah, like
it was in the harbor. It was next to the Caspian Sea.
But the whales couldn't even get up because it was like, a harbor. So it would have to get up a seawall almost. It made no sense. But it was very well done. And again, it just looked authentic. A+ for makeup special effects.
Yeah, well, it's just further proof that there literally is nothing that climate change can't accomplish. And that's on that list too. All right, we're ready for Q&A, or one of our favorite parts of the show as well, when our audience gets to ask us questions and kind of direct the end of the show here. So, Linnea, this is your specialty.
Sure
Let's
thing.
go.
Okay, so we have a good mix of questions here, ones for our guests and also kind of general science questions. I'll start with one of those. This is from Rico Man, who I have not seen ask questions in the past. So welcome to the show, Rico. He says, only one climate alarmist claim makes sense to me, human-induced or natural, is the rise of CO2 from 280 parts per million to 400 and increasing too fast for life to adapt. Is there any evidence that it is or is not? I want to see what you guys think about that one.
We could all answer that one, but
yeah, no.
Well, I'll leave it to the guests, though.
Okay.
No, from talking to people like Will Happer, Richard Lindzen, and Robert Giegengach, the head of the former head of the University of Pennsylvania. There have been times when CO2 has gone up rapidly, dropped rapidly. There's nothing unprecedented about the rise of CO2. I remember when Bill Nye used to always push that idea. So this is such a rapid increase. We can't adapt. Well, you can see how we've adapted. If it is any cause of it, there's been no evidence in extreme weather, and it's been a gentle warming since the end of the Little Ice Age, which according to the first UN report, we haven't even hit temperatures from the medieval warm period yet. So until they had that, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. So there's no evidence, and there's no evidence that this is causing any harm. And then there's geologic evidence that we've had similar periods where CO2 has risen rapidly, accelerated rates, and dropped.
And to add to that, I mean, you have, for example, going back in the past, this is a point that Dr. Patrick Moore likes to make, is that the world was largely CO2 starved. Below 200 parts per million, things get pretty bad for biodiversity and life on Earth. So actually, this increase is a good thing, because historically there have been epochs and time periods where it's been upwards of 1,000 or more parts per million. So we have an idea by just looking in the past, what type of world we will be in if it continues to rise. And actually, back in my day, they used to call that the climate optimum because biodiversity flourished. Things were well on planet Earth. And this is actually a good thing for CO2 to increase. So I don't know why the panic about the Earth returning to the way it was in the distant past is something that we need global conferences for and to panic everybody about.
Yeah, I mean, look,
one quick ad. NOAA and the Washington Post, so people who like their government science and the corporate media, both showed a chart of the last 500 million years. You can go to Climate Depot and just search NOAA chart or Washington Post chart. And they show that we are in the coldest period of the last 500 million years temperature-wise. So there's no there in terms of alarming. And they were forced to, I don't know why they did this. And maybe Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post is having some kind of, business model change of heart on climate, because it was amazing. The Washington Post did, I don't know, it came out of the blue. They had the incredible chart, and you can look at it, and it actually shows we're in one of the coldest periods of the last 500 million years, if you believe corporate government science.
Look,
Right.
If you believe in evolution and you believe that humans evolved from earlier forms of primates, we evolved at a time when CO2 was much higher than today. And if you're worried about, and we have locations, submarines, where CO2 builds up much higher levels. It's not considered a danger until it reaches 5,000 parts per million. So much higher than ambient levels. But you can test it yourself. Every time you leave the outdoors and go indoors, especially when I give lectures, when I've given presentations in classrooms, one of my colleagues used to have a CO2 monitor, and I got one once. And I went into the classroom, and the classroom ambient levels were 700 parts per million. They weren't 700 outside. Huge, fast, rapid change in what I was experiencing. And then I asked the students to breathe out onto this thing. And it's like they were shocked at how much CO2 they were putting out. So the level of CO2 that we're seeing now and the rise is not a danger to us health-wise.
Right. And I would point out, easy for them to make claims like saying that we're in the fastest rising CO2, ever recorded, in history stuff, when, we don't have the resolution of data going back all that far to show that they're wrong about that. Like, it's just an unfalsifiable claim. You can look at ice core data, you can look at other kinds of proxies, but the fact of the matter is we don't have hour by hour, minute by minute carbon dioxide records going back tens of thousands of years the way that we do for the last 30 years, Okay. So Kite Man Music, this is a typo, but Kite Man Music asks, are the wheels coming off the climate change bandwagon?
Well, as someone who's declared multiple times in the past that it was over, the scam was ending, and been proven wrong, yes, it's happening again. Why not? Why not just keep making predictions that it's over? It's hard. I don't believe it's over. It can never be over. We're at COP 29. There's probably going to be a COP 39, and for all we know, a COP 49 at these UN summits. And simply because the money, the established infrastructure, what they might do is shift it. Again, there's this big movement to try to merge global health with climate. Climate will become part of global health, and that we may see in the future. So climate won't be the lead because they know it's not working. I mean, even young people, the polling showed this last election split. There was no definitive side that all the young people went for, the climate alarmist candidates. So as someone with a horrible track record, I say, no, it's not over, but it's definitely at its low point of the last 30 years. Donald Trump's election was its low point. The key point on that is 2016, when Trump was elected, we were just starting UN Paris, net zero was this wonderful dream, solar and wind, cheaper, EVs were going to take over. Fast forward 8 years to 2024. Everyone knows they've been lied to. Everyone knows it's a scam. You have the EU Green New Deal put on hold, the EU elections rebuking it, the farmers in the Netherlands forming a party, the farmers spraying manure on the EU headquarters. You have the lie about EVs, and even now all the major automakers are coming out and basically saying this isn't working, and their cars are sitting on the lot. We've hit 7% sales in the US and seem to have maxed out. it's none of it. There's no there. So this is a big, scary thing. And I call it the Trump effect, because this could start unwinding it. When he was there, Argentine president talked to Trump, pulled the 170 member delegation out of the UN conference. The French foreign minister the same day decided not to attend the conference because of some slight by some other country. So you're just all these little signs. We need a Clegxit, a climate exit from the UN climate process, much like Britain did with their Brexit. Let's hope it can happen. We're in much better position than 8 years ago when I declared the climate scam over. So this time I'm going to try something different. It's kind of like flipping a coin. I'm going to call tails this time and see if I'm right.
Yeah, Marc Morano, you've been standing on the corner wearing a sandwich board that says the end is near for 20 straight years. And one of these years, you're going to be right.
That's right. I'll forget all the times I was wrong and just focus on the time I was right. Yeah.
That's how it works, right? I think that's how predicting the weather works. Sorry, Anthony. Here's Robert Reed, who says, I'd like to see a Heartland video on forest fires and how the majority of them in Canada, at least, are caused by people and not climate change. Robert Reed, have I a video for you? I believe I do cover that issue in a video called The Impact of Climate Change on Wildfires, which is available on this very YouTube channel. So go check that out. I just needed to do that one really fast. Okay. Above Us Only Sky asks, is it fair to say that water vapor has more of an effect on climate change than CO2? Yes.
Water vapor makes up 97% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And just 2 years ago, a single volcanic eruption, undersea volcanic eruption, added 10% to the water vapor in the atmosphere. And gosh, what happened the following months and years? Oceans warmed higher than they had been. The ambient temperature, as measured by our different measurements, was higher than it had been since they've been able to measure with these modern instruments. But surely the volcano had nothing to do with that, and all the water vapor out of the atmosphere.
I will say, be careful about that water vapor thing, because I actually approached a scientist at the UN meeting about that question. I said, since water vapor, isn't that the big thing? The explanation they came back to me was, that's true. Water vapor is a primary greenhouse gas, but more CO2 creates more water vapor. So they try to make a connection that our increase in CO2 causes some sort of forcing, I think the term he called it, and I didn't fully follow his logic in this, thereby causing more water vapor. So it actually compounds the problem. You have both more CO2 and it forcing more water vapor into the atmosphere. So that's a good question for Will Happer and folks of that sort, to try and show them why they're wrong on that. But that's the answer I was given.
Usually the claim they're making with that is that it increases evaporation. And so you have more water vapor in the air. But it's got a pretty low residence time, I think, water vapor. So it usually falls out as precipitation pretty fast. So, which leads to cooling. It's all fun stuff. Okay. Here's one for you, Marc, from Energy Colonizer. He asks, what were the portions or the rations of meat in those food lines at COP29? A max of 1,500 calories of low protein gruel, or all you can eat?
Well, they had both. There was no all you can eat. I don't know about maybe one of the restaurants, but the food buffet, you had a buffet and you say, give me a little this and that. I guess they could have waited. I don't remember, but I got a hot dog and I got some kind of meat dish. The problem is they weren't overly generous. Certainly, I love the food in Azerbaijan because it was just all kinds of great meats, including chicken and beef, including liver as well, which you can't really find liver at many restaurants, but you can there. But what they did is they put meat and then pile it with all this rice, or they'd give you a hot dog with giant buns on it. And I think I had a video of just the hot dog. I ended up just eating the meat outside and tossing the bread, and ate the meat off the top and tossed the rice. So I ended up buying multiple meals to get enough meat. So they were skimpy on the meat, but that's typical of any kind of food court. If you go to a conference, a sporting event, you're always going to get that kind of stuff, unless there's maybe in America, they're specifically marketing like supersize hot dog or something like that. But the meat was good, but no, not in the UN itself, not at COP29. The food court, they were small and they couched it with a lot of, I would call lower quality food, bread and rice.
Alrighty.
No bugs though.
No bugs.
No bugs were
No
served. That's
bugs.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so Miles asks, any word on Clintel International Climate Conference in Czech Parliament in Prague officially declares climate emergency at an end? How many are involved? Not totally sure what this question is. It's a little,
Yeah, that
the
was
wording is a little odd.
during COP29. I think it was over 100 of the scientists attending that conference in Czech Republic had signed a declaration during the COP29, basically saying the climate emergency does not exist and is over and all that. And so that, of course, was completely ignored by the mainstream media. And I covered it at Climate Depot, and some other climate skeptical sites covered it. But it just goes to show you, Europeans are starting to speak out more and more. The Polish parliament, Viktor Orban's government, and it's you're seeing it with, again, the citizens groups from the farmers on. What we need is this kind of narrative change. If you go look at what, like, the UK is one of the worst offenders before, now that Nigel Farage is ascendant, no, it's not the case anymore, but they would have that UK fires report 2019 was completely bonkers, talking about stopping new airports, regulating carbon dioxide as you would asbestos. And the conservative members of the House of Parliament there were going over it, House of Commons, and they were going over it. Well, of course, we all agree with net zero, but this may have gone a little too far here. They were so timid and afraid. They were all Benji backers in terms of accepting the narrative. There's a problem, a crisis, but we're just going to push back a little. That whole mindset needs to change, and I think it is slowly changing, and that's where Donald Trump comes.
And it's going to change in the Eastern Europe. I mean, I appreciate what James Taylor's doing at Heartland. We are working as well. We did a conference in Austria earlier this year. I think it's going to be the Hungarians, it's going to be the Czechs, it's going to be the Poles. Much like in this country, who really led the revolution? It's the red states. And I think it's going to be the kind of red nations, if you would, in Europe that are going to get them out of the dark ages, because they still clamp down hard. We have good allies in France and in Germany. They're fighting the good fight, but they still receive a lot of oppression over there.
Alrighty. I don't know how much more time we have for questions, but I'll shoot this one up from Chris because it's about COP. And he says, will the failing series of COPs actually allow for a factually rather than politically correct summary for policymakers for AR7?
I don't think so. No.
No.
They can't. That's their core, their center. They're never going to allow that. They've got to keep those reports as alarmist as possible. In their minds, that's the only way you get the politics to follow. So they're not going to allow that. What I wish would happen is Donald Trump pulls out of everything, but requests to go. I'd love to see Donald Trump go and give, I think it was 2019, his speech, the World Economic Forum, where he compared the climate alarmists to fortune tellers. I love him to go to COP and give a devastating speech. It's never been done, and it would be awesome. But I don't know if they'll allow him in if we pull out. They'll probably ban him, as well as I can't even believe we're allowed in, frankly.
Yeah.
We have been kicked out numerous times, but somehow find ourselves back in these. We thought actually bringing MAGA hats in would be kind of stirring things up. We were never more surprised than when all the developing countries loved it. Now, we did get some kind of different looks from people from France, Germany, those types of countries. But on balance, it was almost a little disappointing. We were actually received, very warmly in this place, which we were unaccustomed to. So,
if I were you guys, because I've seen the wanted posters, I would stay out of any country they hold a COP in that is part of the International Criminal Court after what happened yesterday, because they might clap the cuffs on you and send you to The Hague for trial for the climate crimes.
Well, until that day, we're going to be on this show, and they know where to find us, I suppose, as long as the show isn't getting too shadow banned on YouTube, but it is on Rumble and on X. And that will do it for today's show. I thought it was one of our best ever. We certainly had one of our biggest audiences ever, especially on X. I want to thank every one of you who was in the chat today and watching this live today. And if you're listening to it on a podcast afterwards, I'm very happy that you're doing that as well. And if you left us a review and a thumbs up everywhere you see this podcast, like I said before, that really, really helps us out. I want to thank Ace Joling Burnett and Linnea Lueken from the Heartland Institute for being with us. And also, of course, Craig Rucker and Marc Morano from CFACT. Every time, every day, visit climaterealism.com. Visit climateataglance.com. Visit What's Up With That. Visit heartland.org, where you can subscribe to our weekly Climate Change Weekly newsletter for free. And of course, I want to thank our streaming partners, some of which were on the show with us today: Climate Depot, CFACT.org, and Junk Science. We will not have a show next Friday, since that is the Friday after Thanksgiving, but we will be back in 2 weeks, and we hope to see you there. Bye-bye.
Happy Thanksgiving all.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
How dare you!